What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? Story 1. I've told this story before, but about 7 years ago, I was at my mom's house. I live next door when a white car pulled into the driveway. We weren't expecting anyone, so I assumed they were lost and needed directions. I went to the door. A white woman in her 50s or 60s got out, along with a 9 or 10-year-old black girl. This surprised me because I expected the child to stay in the car if they just needed directions. I opened the door, and the woman kind of nudged the girl toward me, both of them wearing big smiles. I said hi and asked what I could help them with. She asked if I was Baggy Raccoon, and I said yes. She told me they had gone to a neighbor's house looking for me, and the neighbor had pointed them to our house. They just stared at me expectantly, as if I was supposed to know the girl and be happy to see her. When I didn't react, the woman told me they were here to see the dentist. No dentists here. This is a small ranch-style house in a fairly rural neighborhood. No dentists here, not anywhere near us. The woman and the girl just kept smiling. They didn't look confused at all. They just kept asking, "Are you sure?" Finally, they left. Later, I asked the neighbor who had directed them to our house, and she said she never told the woman my name, that the woman had asked for me specifically. It's always haunted me. I really feel like I was supposed to know that girl. Like if I were a guy, this would be someone trying to introduce me to a child I didn't know I had. I honestly started wondering if I was losing my mind and had given up a child for adoption. It was that strange of a feeling. My mom firmly believes the girl will come back someday to tell me what it was about, and I think about it frequently. It drives me crazy wondering what they really wanted. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. During World War II, my grandfather and a few of his fellow soldiers witnessed something in the forests of France so strange, the British War Office swore them to secrecy. For decades, he called it only one thing: the splintered woods. My grandfather had been separated from his unit, making his way toward Normandy with a small group of soldiers. As they crossed a clearing, they suddenly heard movement approaching. They dropped to the ground, crawling through the grass, expecting to see German troops. Then, out of the trees, 20 or 30 German soldiers burst into the clearing. But something was off. They weren't charging, they weren't fighting, they looked terrified, running in a state of absolute panic. And then, they froze. Every single one of them locked in place, mid-step, like statues. Some weren't even touching the ground. The forest went silent. Not a single bird, not a breath of wind. Nothing. After a few moments, a horrible noise filled the clearing, like metal scraping against concrete. The frozen soldiers began to blur, their bodies shifting like heat waves, and then they were gone. Just like that. No bodies, no sound, no trace. My grandfather and the men who were with him all reported the same thing, and when they returned to the UK, they were immediately summoned to the War Office in London. Over several days, they were interrogated about what they saw. Eventually, they were flown back to France and taken to the exact clearing. What they found there was shocking. The area was heavily guarded, the ground freshly excavated, and strangely there were dogs, hundreds of dogs, roaming aimlessly as if they were drawn to the place. Other groups of soldiers had reported the same phenomenon in that same patch of forest. My grandfather realized they weren't alone. Something deeply unusual was happening there. Before he died in 1985, my grandfather went back to that part of France. By then, the forest had been cleared. In its place stood several unmarked warehouses, fenced off and guarded by what he described as unusually professional military security. He believed whatever happened that night had been buried, literally, and locked away forever. The soldiers who experienced it gave it a name. They called it the splintered woods. So what do you think my grandfather and those men really saw that night? A glitch in reality? A secret wartime experiment? Or something we still can't explain? Let me know your theories in the comments. Story 3. I'm curious if anyone else has experienced something like this. Years ago, my wife and I kept running into the same woman everywhere we went, and I mean everywhere. This went on for about a year. If we went to the grocery store, she would be there shopping. At Starbucks, she'd be sitting right behind us. Walking around the mall, she would pass us going in the opposite direction. At the movie theater, she'd be behind us in line for popcorn. The creepiest encounter happened while we were driving on the freeway. My wife glanced at the car next to us and screamed. Sure enough, it was her. She was always alone and never spoke to us, but she always made eye contact. She had a very distinctive appearance, extremely tall and thin, with unusually tight skin stretched across her face. Her look was so striking that we joked we were being studied by an alien. It was some serious glitch in the Matrix stuff. Story 4. It was years ago when I was about 17. I had gotten home from school feeling unwell, so I spent the rest of the day lying on the couch. By about 8 p.m., I was feeling even worse and decided I should just try to sleep whatever it was off. I went to my room, got into bed, and passed out pretty quickly. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I suddenly woke up in my pitch-black bedroom with only one thought: I'm going to die right now. My body was so weak the room was spinning, and I felt like I was on fire. I looked over to the edge of my bed, and sitting there was my grandmother, who had died just a few months earlier. She patted my arm and said, "It's going to be okay. Just call for your dad. Try it. Call for your dad." So I started calling for him. It felt like an eternity, but he finally burst through my door and asked what was wrong. I looked over, and my grandmother was gone. He got me up and took me to the ER, where they discovered I had a fever of 106 degrees Fahrenheit, which explained a lot. I had to get a ton of fluids and a shot in my hip, but I eventually felt okay-ish. Her being there felt so real, it was so strange. I know logically she wasn't there, but it felt completely real. That messed with me a little. I had loved her dearly, and her death was very sudden. We kept her ashes in a beautiful urn in the house, positioned under a painting she had done herself. When I got home and passed by, I said thanks to her. I know it was the fever scrambling my brain and maybe some sleep paralysis, but it still made me question the afterlife and those sorts of things. Story 5. When I was about 12 and still living at my parents' house, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I got to the bathroom, I heard what sounded like a party going on downstairs. Laughter, music, the sound of glasses clinking together for a toast, the whole thing. I thought it was weird that my parents had friends over so late without telling me, but I decided to go see who was there. I opened the door to the kitchen, and the entire downstairs was completely dark and silent, not even a TV on. I was thoroughly confused, but the strangeness of the situation didn't really register at the time, so I never told anyone. Years and years later, I mentioned this to my dad, and he said he had heard them too. It turns out there used to be a small public bar in our home, which is over 150 years old. I guess some of the patrons decided to hang out for eternity. Story 6. My cat hated me for the first 7 years we had him. He was a feral cat that had been tamed by my wife and only accepted affection from her. My wife assured me that this was common for feral cats. Then one day, he suddenly warmed up to me and wanted me to pet him. We've been best friends ever since. This was approximately 4 years ago, about the time my wife's brain cancer was becoming aggressive even before we were aware of it. She died 2 years ago. It's like he knew it was just going to be the two of us one day. Story 7. Back in 2004, I burned about 10 filing cabinets full of papers for my high school friend's dad for less than minimum wage. Literally millions of lines of words, maybe even 1 million pages or close to it, just tossing them into a barrel and burning them. After a few hours, I victoriously tossed in the last folder. A little sprite of flame shot out, and a singed fortune cookie-looking piece of paper floated to the ground in front of me with only these words: "What burns does not return." I still don't know what the hell that was about. The probability is just astronomical. Story 8. The first time it happened was the first time I'd ever considered that anything supernatural might be real. Very occasionally at my desk at work, I hear breathing in my left ear. There's a wall behind me and a window to my left, but you can't hear any outside noise. I don't feel a breeze or anything, I just hear it. It's peaceful and sad, like a sigh. My first thought was the air conditioning, but it's such a clear sound that cuts through everything as if it's coming from a whole different world than the general office noise. It's very definitely only in my left ear, and I never hear it anywhere else. Every time it happens, I very calmly just get up and leave my desk for 5 minutes. When I come back, it's gone. Story 9. The first year of college is supposed to be exciting. Mine? It left me wondering if something else was living in my dorm. I lived in an apartment-style dorm on the 7th floor with 3 roommates. We each had our own bedrooms but shared a common space. Nothing unusual until strange things started happening. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to find my phone automatically playing a song. I closed the app, but it happened again. And again. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, until one of my roommates told me the exact same thing had happened to her. A few nights later, it got weirder. I woke up to a beeping sound. When I checked my phone, it was playing a voice recording. The duration read 0.00. Impossible. It shouldn't have been able to play at all. I deleted it immediately. But that wasn't the last time. Another night, my roommate and I stayed up late watching a movie. Around 3 a.m., she went to bed. Minutes later, she burst into my room asking what I was doing. I was confused. I'd just been reading in bed. She said she heard strange noises at her window, like heavy breathing or sighing, and thought I was trying to scare her. I followed her to her room. Sure enough, we both heard it. That slow, unsettling sound, like someone exhaling just outside. I told her it must be the wind, but when we opened the window, the trees outside were completely still. I don't have the same phone, the same dorm, or the same roommates anymore. But even now, living on campus, I still think about those nights on the 7th floor and what might have been there with us. Story 10. Not exactly creepy, but this one definitely made me question reality. Back when I worked at a gas station, there was a regular customer I could never figure out. Some days he was soft-spoken and shy. Other days he was loud, obnoxious, and even smoked a different brand of cigarettes. But it was always the same work truck, always the same coworkers, always at the same time of day. Then one afternoon he walked in, headed straight for the bathroom, and a minute later he walked in again and came up to the counter. That's when it hit me. Twins. It took me 8 months to realize there were 2 of them. Not identical either, just similar enough to make me think reality itself was glitching. Story 11. I'm the type of person who always keeps my bedroom door closed and locked. No exceptions, even when I'm home alone. About a year ago, it was 1 a.m., and I got up for a glass of water. I came back, closed and locked my door like always, and went to bed. 30 minutes later, halfway between sleep and wakefulness, the ambient noise in my room just vanished. That gut feeling hit me instantly. Something was wrong. I got up. My door? Wide open. I was home alone. To this day, I chalk it up to a one-time mistake, but my brain hasn't let me forget it. Story 12. Almost got kidnapped. Maybe. I hailed a lift because I was too drunk to drive. A car pulled up. I got in and said, Take me to 123 Home Street. My phone rang. I answered and heard, I'm your Lyft driver. I just watched you get into a car and that is not your Lyft. You need to get out right now. Neat. Hey, bud. I'm getting a friend to pick me up. Thanks anyway. I hopped out at the red light where we were stopped. The real driver and I talked about how one of the reasons we didn't have Lyft in my city for a while was because girls were getting kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking. So now, since these guys can't use rideshare apps, they're preying on drunk people they see on the street hailing rides and just picking them up. Thankfully, I got into the front seat because the back might have had child locks. I asked the driver to make sure I got into my house before driving away since the creeper had my address. I went to pick up my car the next day, and not only did I not get sex trafficked, I didn't get a parking ticket either, so that was cool. I'm definitely a lot more cautious now. It's really weird thinking that might have been a life-destroying event. Story 13. I used to visit my grandparents' house with my father every Sunday. A very odd family lived a few houses down. They had a massive property in the middle of old Pasadena. The house had 3 stories, a basement, and a huge backyard. I was introduced to the little girl who lived there at some birthday party. We would sit on the side of the house and look for 4-leaf clovers. She told me she liked to play in the backyard barn, but nobody was allowed to go back there anymore. She promised there were tons of animals there, and I loved animals, so of course I wanted to go. She said we had to be very quiet and fast, but she would show it to me. We had to follow this little trail maybe a quarter mile behind the house. There was tons of foliage around the trail that blocked out the building, and there was a barn back there. It was massive and really something you would see out of a movie. She said it had been in the family for a long time, but the barn looked pristine. When we approached it, she told me we had to be very quiet and that we couldn't go inside. We started playing around the barn, but not directly next to it. We started looking for clovers again for a while before I remembered she had mentioned animals. When I asked if we could see them, she scrunched up her face and got up. She didn't say anything but did get up and start walking toward the barn. The grass was overgrown right up against the barn, which didn't really make sense because it looked brand new. The rest of the area was cleared out. The grass was only overgrown near the barn. She started digging through the grass like she was looking for something. She wouldn't tell me what. The longer I stood next to the barn, the more uncomfortable I got. I felt like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be. I became distracted and started looking around for our parents or some adult to jump out and scold us. When I turned around again, there was a pile of bones sitting on the ground. I looked up at her, and she was holding a very small skull in her hands. It looked like it would have belonged to a sheep, but way, way smaller. She leaned in and whispered, "This is why we can't play back here. My mommy said he doesn't like animals anymore." I'm not sure why I wasn't freaked out. Once I noticed the bones, I could see them scattered all through the grass. We heard her mom call for us, and we ran back. It wasn't until a year or so later, at another birthday party, that I was in the backyard again. I asked her mom if we could go play by the barn, and she looked at me like she'd seen an alien. She said they never had a barn. The trail to it just disappeared. There were big trees there and everything. Something weird happened with the adults after that, and I wasn't allowed to go to their house anymore. I have no idea what happened. It was very creepy. I'm fairly certain I had an overactive imagination as a child and dreamed all of that up. I asked my father a few years back if he'd ever seen that neighbor's barn. He had no idea what I was talking about. Why would there be a barn in the middle of a big city? Story 14. I have 2 wireless mice, one for a work laptop and one for my personal laptop. When I let things get messy, I usually just stack one laptop on top of the closed one underneath, with both mice near the mouse pad. So I get a call from work saying I need to hop online. I open the work laptop, grab a mouse, and start opening my work portal. I open email and do my usual routine. Everything works fine. Then I realize that I'm using the mouse connected to my personal laptop on my work laptop. I shake the mouse, no response. It stopped working once I realized that it shouldn't be working. Ever since then, I found it hard to believe that we don't live in some sort of simulation. Story 15. I was camping with my family on summer break when I was a kid. The first night, we heard some rustling off in the distance, so my dad went to check it out. He came back and said he'd found an old, dirty sleeping bag with a bunch of trash around it. I took this as him implying that it could have been a camp that got ransacked by a curious bear. We'd hear movement in the tree line for the next couple of nights, and it scared the hell out of me. The last night we were there, I had a nightmare that a bear had made it into my tent and was licking and biting my feet. I woke up from the dream and shined my watchlight into the dirt-covered, wrinkled face of an elderly man. He was sucking on my toes and immediately exited my tent and took off right after we made eye contact. I still don't know if it was my imagination or not, all these years later. I never told anyone, and I have nightmares about it often. Story 16. When I was 8 or 9, I woke up every night to bright headlights cutting through my bedroom window. The lights wouldn't move like a car. They just stopped, then went out. After the light vanished, I'd see long, thin shadows of a man pass by, stopping right in front of my window, as if he were looking inside. I lay perfectly still and pretended nothing was happening, night after night, for months. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Years later, I learned that my best friend across the street, whose window faced mine, refused to sleep in her room as a child. She said a man would park in her side yard and walk over to mine every night. The shadows I'd seen, the light from her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad watching over us and never told me, but it wasn't him. For years, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I wasn't. Story 17. I was playing with our dog in the living room. At the time, I was around 9 years old. We were doing our usual only play like this when mom isn't home, or she'll tell us to stop type of playing, basically playing fetch in the living room. At one point, I threw the toy, which caused it to ricochet out of the living room into the kitchen. Franz, our dog's name, chased it and disappeared around the corner to get it. At that exact moment, the front door opened and Mom walked in with Franz on a leash after a 2-hour walk over the beach and dunes. I tried to explain, but I can't. I played with him for at least 15 minutes in, apparently, my imagination, but I just don't believe that. Story 18. When I was 15, I was home alone hanging out upstairs in my bedroom. At the time, we had 2 small dogs. I was sitting in my room watching TV when the dogs started going crazy, barking downstairs. It wasn't uncommon for them to bark when a person walked by or came to the door, so I just stayed in my room and thought nothing of it at first. They kept barking non-stop for probably about 10 minutes before I finally got fed up and decided to go downstairs to tell them to stop. The stairs in my house led into the kitchen. As soon as I reached the bottom, I saw him. A very tall man in a pea coat and top hat stood in the doorway between my kitchen and dining room. I could see no face. I bolted back upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom where I called my parents. While I was waiting for them to come home, I began hearing several seemingly aggravated male voices outside the bathroom door. I was absolutely terrified. Eventually, my aunt arrived at my house to check on me. The voices faded, and I was able to calm down. About 2 years ago, I got a phone call from my mother telling me she had been reading the local paper. We live in a very small town, and there was an article in it about my childhood home written by the town historian. The house, built in 1805, had once been a local gathering spot for the elite of the small village. The first floor, now the kitchen, dining room, and living room, had once been a parlor and tavern of sorts, while the second floor of the house functioned as a dance hall. Things in the house had been rearranged a bit. The staircase, being one of those things, had been moved from what was now a second-floor bedroom closet, which would have exited downstairs between the kitchen and dining room. My family was slightly aware of this, but never had the exact details. Very cool, I thought, until my mom continued reading. In 1836, there was an accident. Three men got into an argument about their differing political views, two of them against the other. The disagreement ended with the third man being pushed over the railing at the top of the stairs, landing at the base of the stairs where he slowly suffered from and eventually succumbed to his injuries. The spot where he died was the exact spot I had seen the faceless man in the top hat almost 15 years earlier. My mom clipped the news article and my father framed it and hung it in the dining room, right near the doorway into the kitchen. An hour later, while my father was home alone, he heard a crash. Upon investigation, he found the clipped article in its shattered frame, lying face down 15 feet from where he had hung it. I always knew what I had seen and heard was supernatural. Now you'll never convince me otherwise. You'll also never convince me to stay in that house alone again. Story 18. I worked at a small retail shop that sold mostly small accessories and clothes. I had never really believed in ghosts, but my coworkers always swore the place was haunted. Lights would flicker randomly, and canvases would fall violently to the ground despite my efforts to prop them up so they wouldn't. The thing that really made me question everything happened when I was closing alone at night. We had a sunglass display in the middle of the store, just a flat glass shelf with a bunch of sunglasses laid out nicely on top. I walked past it to the register and heard this huge crash. I looked back, and all of the sunglasses were on the floor. It looked like somebody had just taken their arm and dragged it across the shelf, pushing them all off. There wasn't anything above the display, so nothing could have knocked them off. I don't have an explanation for it. It was right as I was about to close, too. He was a rude ghost. Story 20. I dreamed it was dark and raining, and I was in the woods, walking toward a campfire. There were three men around it whom I had never seen before. One was wearing a shirt and pants with huge white and black horizontal stripes, such as a prisoner might wear. I could not figure out why I wasn't scared in my dream. Fast forward 10 months later, we're hunting and camping. A friend brings along three of his friends that we had never met before. I have to go to the bathroom. We had buried a 50-gallon drum and put a seat on it, and my husband walks with me since it's dark. We start back and it starts to rain. We get to the clearing, and there are his three friends around the fire, one wearing the outfit I described above. I wasn't afraid in my dream because my husband was behind me, and I just couldn't see him. No one believes me. Story 21. I constantly had dreams of a red-haired kid in my dad's childhood home. It was my paternal grandparents' house, and all my dad's sisters who had lived there had never encountered this ghost. No one believed me when I talked about this kid. He began to play in the bathroom with me because he loved to play in water in my dreams, and it was downstairs so the adults wouldn't hear the water running. We moved out, thinking this imaginary friend was a cry for help or that, to my very superstitious parents, a ghost was contacting me. I recall an incident where I woke up in the bathtub with the water running one night, and we moved out 3 days later. My dad's cousins moved in, and their children also talked about him. The mystery ginger kid with blue overalls and a green shirt, wearing only socks that were horribly stained throughout. I had never met these kids before at that point, but I instantly loved them for backing up my story of the ghost kid. To the rest of the family, I was being bratty because I was no longer the only child. The weird part was that the kid inhabited the kitchen for them. He had inhabited the bathroom and backyard in my dreams and constantly asked for food, whereas he only liked to splash in water in mine. My dad's cousins had the house blessed by the local priest when in the mornings, 1 or 2 of the 5 kids would be found covered in food stains or fast asleep on the kitchen floor, surrounded by half-eaten food. A therapist explained it as shared psychosis, but it doesn't explain my own version of the kid and his fascination with food for the other children. Story 22. So I'm a diehard atheist, but I can't fully explain this one. I have a big family. like really big. Last count, I had around 20 cousins. One day we were all hanging out at the family farm and decided to spend the night. We just did girls in one room and boys in another, and everything was going fine. It was around 4 in the morning when I woke up to one of my cousins standing by the door. The hallway light was on and shining on my face, so I could only see his outline, but I knew it was Josh. I asked him what he was doing and if he needed something, but he didn't move. My eyes were starting to adjust, and I could see more details, but I couldn't see his face. I was really sleepy and confused when the hallway light, Josh, everything disappeared. It was just darkness and an open door. I knew I was awake because I was sitting up. I decided to get one of my roommate cousins up and go check on the boys. Josh had an allergy to something. He didn't want to bother anyone, so he took a Benadryl and went to bed. When I checked on him, he wasn't breathing. We got my uncle up. He gave Josh some heavy-duty medication, and we took him to the hospital. Everyone was fine. Josh told me he knew I was an insomniac, and while he was suffocating, unable to make a noise, he kept praying I couldn't sleep and would decide to check on him. Story 23. I was talking with my son when he was 3 or 4 years old while he was playing with a Darth Vader toy in his mom's lap. We were talking about the Wiggles or Barney or whatever. Completely unprompted, he said nonchalantly, "Dingo cold, and went back to playing with his Star Wars toys. I asked him what he said, and he denied saying anything with a giggle. My wife very clearly heard him say dingo cold, too. I had never told him about my childhood best friend Dingo losing his life in an avalanche 10 years earlier. Story 24. Near my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people visited very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around in. I went with some friends when I was 19 or 20, and we were crawling around when we found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before, had never even seen it before, so we pushed forward and decided to check it out, even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave, and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with what light we had, we noticed it was really clean inside the cave, as in, it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere, like all the other small caves did. While in there, we got a really eerie feeling after being there for only a short while, hearing weird and strange things, feeling like we were being touched, poked, and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others, although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all a decent distance apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced we should come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside when we had entered during midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but we have never been able to find this cave again. Story 25. A few weeks ago, my sister, who lives down the road from the house, called me and told me the lights were on in Mom's bedroom and all the barn lights were on. Hours passed, and her husband decided to go up the hill to the house. He walked in the door and went to the light switch to shut off the lights to the barn. He switched the barn lights off, and all the lights went off. The inside and outside lights just shut off at the same time. He freaked out a little and switched it back on, but there was nothing, no lights, no power, no anything. He turned around and left as fast as he could. The power had been off for over a year at that point. We assumed the mortgage company had turned on the power at first, but they hadn't. The service is still off. There were probably 12 lights running on that phantom power. Edit. I'm just adding some extra information and additional weirdness. My mother died in her room. My sister keeps having dreams of her asking for food or water. I can't figure out what caused the lights to be on. My grandfathers on both sides were master electricians, and my father, mother, and stepfather were electricians. I was also an electrician for many years, so I don't have a good explanation for it. My best guess is that water got into the outside meter box and caused a connection across the plastic-covered meter blades, creating a temporary short, but once he flicked off the barn light switch, it broke the connection and couldn't continue powering the inside light that was on, and couldn't reconnect after he flicked the switch back on. It hadn't rained in a week when that happened, so it doesn't make sense, and it's all I can think of to explain it as not just supernatural weirdness. If any of you have a better explanation, I would love something rational so I can understand it. My irrational side says to go to the barn and investigate. Mom is sending a message. My last bit of oddity is about a guitar string. A week after she passed away, I woke up and went to the bathroom. I stepped out of bed, and a guitar string wrapped around my foot. The guitar string was a flat-wound E string. That E string came from a set that was inside a guitar case in another room. It was a very specific type of string and unmistakable. I hadn't opened that case in years, and it wasn't in my bedroom. My mother bought me that guitar when I was a teen. Story 26. There were two incidents. The first one was a UFO. I saw a light streak across the sky, make a 90-degree turn, and streak away until it vanished. Years later, I learned that it was probably just an asteroid breaking up. I put that one to rest. The second one happened when I was about 8. We were driving along a road in the backcountry, and I was staring out the window when, in the distance in a field, I saw a silvery green glowing cloud that was completely unnatural. It suddenly moved, almost ran toward the road, then up a tree just as we were passing it. As we climbed a hill, I saw it drop from the tree onto the road and float back into the fields. Story 27. I am a TA in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the cadaver lab with dead bodies. Late one night, I was working alone in the cadaver lab when I started to hear a noise. It was hard to tell what the noise sounded like, but it was a consistent, muffled noise, so I walked around the room and located it. Normally the bodies are all kept in these big metal crates, but at the time we had one more body than we did crates, so one body was in a plastic body bag, and that's where the noise was coming from. I was terrified at this point, all alone in the lab, looking down at this plastic body bag where I could see the outline of the body that presumably was coming back to life because it was definitely making noise. I stood over this body for a solid minute debating whether I should open the bag, and finally the noise just stopped. I got all my stuff together and bolted from the lab. A couple of weeks later, the professor told me to be careful if I ever worked on that body because there was a live pacemaker in it, so don't cut into it, and it would vibrate and ring every few hours if it was low on battery. I let out the biggest sigh of relief that we weren't haunted. Story 28. Sleep paralysis. A few years ago, I was dreaming that I was talking to a friend of mine, so far nothing weird. But then, for some reason, I realized that I was in a dream, and the person I was talking with technically wasn't my friend. Suddenly, their appearance turned black, and I felt them pushing me down and holding me down in my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. At this point, my cat woke up and jumped on me as if to protect me. Then the dark silhouette, or whatever that thing was, vanished, and I woke up. I swear I had red marks on my shoulders where that thing was holding me down in my dream. Story 29. This happened recently, and it still freaks me out. I was playing VR chat with my HTC Vive. I was sitting in my chair and just talking with friends when I suddenly heard something fall down, or like someone tripped over something, just some rumbling noise. I got confused because I was alone at home, so I lifted up my VR headset and looked around in my room. I thought maybe something had simply fallen down, but I couldn't find anything that looked different. And then suddenly, I saw a chocolate bar wrapper on the floor. It was perfectly placed right in front of me, with the writing even facing toward me. Obviously, I got confused and picked it up to look at it. The chocolate was missing. It was just the wrapper. But the problem is, I never bought this chocolate, nor did I eat it, nor had I ever even had this kind of chocolate. It was normal chocolate with nuts and grapes, and I'm not keen on those. It was just lying there. I never found out how it got there, and I never found out what the noise was that I heard. I am still so confused and almost a bit scared by it. Story 30. I had a dream twice. In this dream, I was on the most beautiful island surrounded by the most beautiful emerald sea. I woke up on one of those long chairs near the beach and was approached by an old, jolly man who told me, "Everything is okay. We just have some traffic. In a couple of minutes, you're going to be back home. Enjoy yourself in the meantime." The island had other people, and everyone was relaxed. I made small talk with some guy, and he asked me where I was from. I told him the name of the city I live in, and he replied that he had never heard of it. He also named his own city, something like Sector R61. That was weird, but on this island, I was unable to freak out or get mad or anything. I was relaxed all the time, so I thought nothing of it. Also, he didn't look 100% human. Eventually, the old man returned and told me that everything was solved now and that I was ready to go back. The next thing I knew, I was awake in my bedroom at exactly 7 a.m., completely relaxed and feeling in top condition. Story 31. My wife and I had a 2-hour drive back from St. Louis to our home, during which both of us lost time. We woke up 3 hours later, still an hour and a half away from home, having only used enough gas to go that half hour. Our GPS showed we had been driving our normal route. We still have no idea what happened, but we know we hadn't pulled over and that neither of us had any memory between taking an exit and seeing this one particular billboard for a restaurant we always pass. It still freaks me out completely. Story 32. Auditory hallucinations. Those are terrifying. I was driving down a rural, really dark road at night. I was extremely sleep-deprived and had drunk several of those 240 milligrams caffeine monster energy drinks. I didn't have the radio on, so it was pretty quiet. Then the whispering started. I was confused and didn't understand what it was. I tried to focus on it. Was my stereo not all the way off? Then it started mumbling louder. This wasn't good. Then I heard a very clear turn here, but my GPS said to continue for 12 miles. No way. Absolutely not. I turned the radio on really loud and continued home. At my next physical, I mentioned it to my doctor. Am I insane? Both sleep deprivation and caffeine have been known to induce auditory hallucinations individually. Combining both, it's perfectly normal to hear things. If it happens again, come back in. I thought I was going mental. Story 33. I used to live out in the country. My house was in the middle of 4 large fields that usually grew corn. We had a large bay window facing out toward the nearest neighbor, over the field with a row of short bushes in front of it. One night, I was sitting alone watching TV beside this window. Mom was out smoking, and my sister was in her room. The window was cracked open a bit, so I could occasionally hear rustling of birds and such in the bushes. The window was open for airflow, not just to listen to birds. All of a sudden, all noise stopped, and a small, frail voice came from outside the window. "Help me!" I froze. There was still no noise outside after the voice. Nothing else was said that I could hear, and I didn't move until my mom came back in. I asked if she had heard anything, and she replied no with a confused look. I didn't bother to tell her about what I heard because I didn't want to sound crazy, but that day will always stick with me. Story 34. There was an old man who lived on the road. I drove every day to get to the highway. He sat on his front porch drinking his morning coffee, and he always waved at me when I drove by. I always waved back. This went on for the better part of a decade. One day I was talking to my neighbor about how much Mr. So-and-so's waving made my morning awesome and how I was glad he was still kicking around. My neighbor said, "Wait, what? He's been dead for 3 years. I never saw him again. Who was I waving at?"
Edit. Thanks for the silver. And in response to a few questions, I asked my mom later that day. Didn't tell her why, because my mom hates spooky stories and won't even watch scary movies. If Mr. So-and-so had died, and he had in fact been dead for 3 years.
Story 35. One morning, I woke up to my alarm going off at 6:30 as usual and got up and cooked breakfast. As soon as I sat down to eat, my alarm went off again and I woke up in bed. I had dreamed that I woke up and went about my morning routine. That was easily the most disorienting thing I've ever experienced. Story 36. I once took a nap at my boyfriend's house and fell into a deep sleep. His best friend had died 2 years earlier, we'll call him Jay, and I never got the chance to meet him. I only knew stories that my boyfriend told me about him. I began dreaming. I dreamt I woke up from my nap and walked around the house to find my boyfriend. I kept running into people I knew, and each time I would say, "I am sleeping right now. I need to wake up." For about 2 hours, I walked around trying to convince everyone this wasn't reality and that this was actually a dream. Then I met Jay. He was in the dream, but he wasn't. I could tell he was the only other real entity, and everything else was part of the dream. I said, "Hello, I'm so-and-so." He said, "I know." Then I said, "So you're Jay," and he nodded. At that moment, we both knew we were meeting for the first time. We just looked at each other and knew. Then I woke up. I told my boyfriend, "I think I just met Jay," and described the dream. He then explained to me that Jay was really into lucid dreaming and would study it, trying to train himself to lucid dream or take acid and shrooms to enhance his dreaming. The whole experience was really intense, but I'm convinced I was in a different dimension and met his deceased best friend. Story 37. I would have chalked this up as a dream, except I know I was awake because I really had to pee. I woke up in the middle of the night, having to pee really badly, as mentioned above, and from my position on the top bunk I could see into the hallway. The bathroom was right across the hall from my bedroom door and also right in my line of sight. I was just starting to move to climb down and go to the bathroom when I saw, heard, and felt the footsteps of a man coming down the hall and going into the bathroom. I thought it must be my dad, but that was strange because he and my mom had their own bathroom. Even stranger, he didn't turn on the light or close the door. After a while I got annoyed because I really had to go, and I called out to him. No answer. So I finally climbed down and switched on the light and found an empty bathroom. I had definitely seen a figure, heard the footsteps, and felt the vibrations of the footsteps of a large man come down the hall and go in there. I was about 10 when this happened, but I remember it so vividly because that is the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me, paranormally speaking. Edit. Alright, as many of you have pointed out, the needing to pee isn't really good evidence of being awake. I am certain that I did at least get up and relieve myself as I later awoke to an empty bladder and no pee in the bed. As I've mentioned in the comments, I've always been a vivid dreamer from a young age and have always been able to tell the difference between dream and reality after the fact. Except in this instance, I've even had plenty of dreams of similar occurrences, but they've all definitely been dreams. There's no proof by any means, but I distinctly remember being awake. Story 38. When I was just old enough to not need a childminder after school, I was home alone one summer's day. My parents, who would not be back until later, made me promise to lock the door and not answer the door to strangers. I did this religiously, as I was also anxious about being in the house by myself. There was a hefty bolt on our front door, and I was to make sure I used it. I would see my folks come home and know to unlock it. So I'm in the house, playing with Lego upstairs. I hear the unmistakable sound of the front door opening and closing. I even felt the percussive thud that was so familiar as the door closed. Thinking one of my parents must have come home early, I went down to greet them. No one there. I then saw the bolt was still across. Now my blood runs cold as I start racing through the possibilities to explain this. I check all doors and windows in panic. All locked. It was a standard 4-bedroom family house, not a mansion. Easily checked. I am alone in the house, so how the hell is the bolt across? It's impossible to open that door from the outside, key or no key. I'm sure it was the door I heard. The house was silent, and it was a very loud and distinctive noise. It did not compute. I quickly left and went to a friend's house. He did not believe me and was certain I was winding him up. Edit. Well, this is the 4th or 5th time I've posted this answer. First time it's gotten attention, some clarification. I'm in the UK. Childminder is commonly used if you are a child. It's only babysitter if you are a baby. How some of you got something inappropriate out of this term is disturbing. No basement, no banging pipes. House was in good order. It was summer, so no heating system was on anyway. It's a UK summer, so no AC or open windows. The house was fully detached and at the end of a quiet street. The door was a solid wood affair, locked with a Yale lock and the bolt I mentioned. No other door in the house made the noise this one did. All internal doors had draft strips, and with carpet, these couldn't move about in the wind. I do not think it was supernatural. Maybe I did then, but I was a kid. Likely some brain mishap or hallucination. Story 39. I once woke up to the sound of heavy breathing and felt as if I was being watched. I couldn't move for a while either. Then I just blurted out my dog's name and kept calling for him. He didn't run over, and as soon as I could get myself to move, I went looking for him. I found him sitting in the kitchen doorway, just staring straight ahead. I started calling him from right behind him, and he wouldn't even turn around. Then I touched his back, and he turned to glance at me, but went right back to his trance. A year or so after the fact, I found out that the first thing was probably sleep paralysis. I'm not too sure about what was going on with the dog, though. Story 40. When I was in college, my friend group was rather large, 10 or so of us, and we always went to lunch together at the cafeteria across campus every day. Outside the atrium, which we had to walk through to get to the cafeteria, bushes ran alongside the pathway, so we would walk to lunch in groups of 2. There were 4 or 5 people in the first group and 4 of us, including me, in the trailing group. The first group walked between the bushes and kept going, but as soon as my group walked between the bushes, we all just stopped. The most uneasy feeling washed over me, and I felt disoriented. The other guys felt it too. Then it hit us all at once. Someone was missing, but we couldn't remember who or anything about them. We did a count, and we were all there, but we all swore there had been one more person who was now just gone. We caught up to the first group and asked them about it, but they had no idea what we were talking about. It's one of the weirdest things that has ever happened to me. I believe in the supernatural, but I take an incredibly skeptical view of it, yet I can't explain that experience. Also, in that same area, a lamppost just appeared overnight one time. No one in the group could remember it being there, and we walked that way every single day. The group I was with when whoever it was disappeared took the long way around from then on. I avoided that area like the plague. Story 41. When I was 19, I worked third shift and was a little paranoid. I would take different routes to and from work, just in case. One night, as I was driving to work, I saw what looked like stereotypical death black hood, no face, scythe. It was just standing in a field, leaning on the scythe and watching me go by. Once I got to work, I called my best friend and told him about it. That way, if I died, someone would know. Work went fine that night. I forgot about it after a few nights. A week or so later, it was the same route on rotation, but I was going home instead of going to work. I was involved in a head-on collision that temporarily killed me. I woke up a week later with extra parts and a lot of damage. My best friend asked me what route I had taken home, and I lost it because it was the route I had seen death on before. Story 42. For me, it was a very specific precognitive dream I had when I was in 10th grade. This was a couple of decades ago. It was one of those dreams you immediately wake from and can remember in fine detail. It was rather boring. I was in an unfamiliar living room with an unfamiliar family, and it was Christmas time. There was a kind of short, fat Christmas tree decorated primarily with white ornaments and white lights. Exchanging gifts were myself, a dad and mom, 3 daughters, 2 of high school age, 1 around preschool age, and 1 brother of middle school age. In the dream, it was apparent that I was their guest and that one of the girls was my girlfriend. At the end of the dream, the youngest daughter picked up a cup of hot chocolate and yelled, "Wake up and smell the freedom." What? Lol. And then I woke up. That was it. About 2 minutes worth of dream, and I remembered everything. I can still remember the details 28 years later. 2 years later. The fall after I graduated high school, I met and began long-distance dating a girl who lived in Los Angeles. I lived in Washington State at the time, and I was invited to spend the holidays with her and her family. I spent the week prior to Christmas with them, and the night before I was scheduled to fly back home, we opened Christmas presents. When we were finished, my girlfriend's youngest sister, who was 4 years old, picked up her cup of hot chocolate, turned to me, and yelled, "Wake up and smell the freedom." I instantly remembered the dream I'd had 2 years earlier. It was that scene. Everything was the same, the situation, the room, the tree, the people, and that wake up and smell the freedom. I still can't explain it. It wasn't similar. I dreamed that precise moment. Over the years, I've occasionally gone down the Google rabbit hole about this type of dreamsel event and how it could have happened. Still no idea. I'll probably never know. But it is without a doubt the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, and it does make me question reality. Story 43. Probably easily explainable, but a huge coincidence nonetheless. My paternal grandpa died out of nowhere 2 years ago in October. Every February, my dad has his birthday at a local bar in a small town where most of my family lives. This particular birthday was the first one ever that my grandpa was not there with us. Halfway through the party, I noticed a jacket identical to his thrown across a deep freezer by the door. Slowly, people started noticing it and mentioning it to each other. So I asked the bartender, who happens to be my second cousin on my dad's side. Turns out the jacket had appeared 3 days before the party. Nobody knew whose it was, nobody came to pick it up, and it even had a pack of his cigarettes in the pocket. To this day, we all believe that Grandpa showed up for one last birthday party. Story 44. I'm slightly convinced I can see the future in my dreams. Ever since I was pretty young, maybe 6 or 7, in otherwise normal dreams where reality was pretty warped and the events didn't really make sense, I would get these odd moments of pure reality where I would suddenly appear in a very normal environment that was typically completely unrelated to whatever I had been dreaming about previously. It was like looking through a window. I could see everything through my eyes, but I couldn't physically control my movements. I was just along for the ride in my own head in the dream. When I was very young, I didn't really think this was that weird. I would very occasionally just instinctively know things like where my assigned seat would be for the new school year, because that's where I was sitting in my dream. I remember this happening very distinctly when I was in middle school. I walked into my biology classroom and sat at my seat, and the scratches in the black lab table exactly correlated to what I had dreamed about a few months prior. It really freaked me out. These dreams started to taper off when I hit my teen years, and I haven't had one in at least 4 years or so. I've tried keeping a dream journal to see if I can verify my dreams against reality, but I always get bored with it and stop doing it in the end. The last one I remember having was me in an empty house, getting on my hands and knees to look in the cabinet under the sink. I'm still waiting to see if this one will come true or if I've just been crazy all these years. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.